Hello, esteemed gentlemen. Sometimes the strongest-looking man in the room is simply the boy who learned, very early, that nobody was coming to save him. That sentence changes the entire way we look at the so-called Sigma male. Because what if some of the traits people admire in these men, extreme independence, emotional privacy, self-reliance, suspicion of authority, discomfort with needing others, and that almost irritating ability to disappear into their own world, didn't begin with confidence? What if some of them began with adaptation? Here is a fact worth sitting with. Childhood experiences can shape how the brain learns to respond to stress, relationships, trust, and emotional safety long after childhood is over. In other words, the adult you're watching may still be carrying strategies that were originally built by a much younger version of himself. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable. A boy who learns that explaining himself doesn't help may eventually become a man who says nothing. A boy who discovers that depending on people leads to disappointment may become fiercely self-sufficient. A boy who learns to monitor everyone's moods may grow into a man who can read a room before anyone has even finished saying hello. People might call him mysterious, independent, cold, unbothered. Sigma. Meanwhile, nobody asks the more difficult question. What did he have to experience to become this good at needing nobody? And yes, there is a little irony here. The internet can turn a quiet man drinking coffee alone into a philosophical superhero before he has even finished his breakfast. But real childhood trauma isn't nearly that glamorous. It can be subtle. It can hide behind good grades, competence, humor, silence, achievement, or the ability to say, "I'm fine," with Oscar-worthy conviction. So in this video, we're going beneath the Sigma stereotype and examining the childhood adaptations that rarely get discussed, the strange habits, emotional defenses, and hidden patterns that can follow a boy into adulthood. Because sometimes the most fascinating thing about a man who seems completely detached isn't why he wants to be alone. It's why being alone became so comfortable in the first place. Number 1, he learned to read the room. Before, he learned to read himself. Some boys become experts at detecting danger without anyone teaching them how. They notice the sound of a door closing, a change in someone's voice, a strange silence at dinner, or the difference between "I'm fine" and "I'm actually fine." They learn to study faces, footsteps, moods, and tiny changes in behavior because knowing what was coming next helped them stay out of trouble. The strange part is that this skill can become incredibly polished. As adults, they may walk into a room and instantly sense tension while everyone else is still making small talk. They notice who is uncomfortable, who is pretending, who is angry, and who suddenly change their attitude. But there is a hidden cost. They can become so focused on reading everyone else that they lose touch with themselves. They know when another person is upset, yet struggle to answer a simple question. What am I feeling right now? Their emotional radar is permanently switched on, even when there is no emergency. And that can make relaxation surprisingly difficult. Silence isn't always peaceful. A neutral facial expression can look suspicious. A harmless change in someone's tone can trigger an internal investigation worthy of a detective with a personal grudge. What once helped the child feel safe can eventually prevent the adult from feeling free. Number 2, he became easy to raise by becoming hard to reach. Some children learn a strange lesson very early. Having needs can create problems. Asking for attention may lead to irritation. Showing sadness may be dismissed. Wanting comfort may be treated as weakness or inconvenience. So instead of demanding anything, the child quietly adjusts. He stops asking. He stops complaining. He becomes remarkably easy to handle. Adults may even praise him for it. He never gives us trouble. He's so mature. He doesn't need much. Those words sound positive, but sometimes they hide something painful. The child has learned that needing people is risky. Eventually, independence stops being a choice and becomes an identity. As he grows older, he may handle everything himself, rarely ask for favors, and keep personal struggles locked away. Someone offers help, and he says, "I'm good." Someone asks, "What's wrong?" And suddenly his vocabulary becomes impressively limited to 2 words. Nothing, really. The problem isn't that he enjoys independence. The problem is that he may no longer know how to safely depend on anyone. He can be surrounded by people and still remain emotionally unreachable. And this is where the childhood pattern becomes especially difficult to notice. Everyone sees a calm, capable adult who doesn't cause problems. Almost nobody sees the younger version of him who learned that the safest way to avoid disappointment was to need less. He didn't necessarily become strong because nobody could hurt him. He may have become strong because he learned not to ask anyone to hold the vulnerable parts. Number 3, he doesn't miss people as easily as he misses who they were supposed to be. Sometimes the hardest thing for a deeply independent man isn't losing someone. It's accepting that the person he needed them to be may never have existed. A difficult childhood can leave a strange kind of unfinished grief. He may have wanted a parent who listened without judging, protected him without making him feel weak, or showed affection without making him earn it. He may have wanted a friend who stayed loyal, a family member who understood him, or simply one person who made him feel completely safe. When that never happens, something changes. He may stop chasing people. He stops begging for explanations. He doesn't necessarily become bitter. Instead, he quietly lowers his expectations until disappointment becomes almost impossible. That's why leaving can look unusually easy for him. People may think he never cared. Sometimes he cared too much. He simply learned that missing someone doesn't mean they belong in his life. And there is another uncomfortable side to this. He may mourn the relationship he could have had more than the relationship he actually had. He isn't grieving the arguments, neglect, or emotional distance. He's grieving the version of that person he kept hoping would eventually appear. That can create an adult who doesn't easily attach to potential. He watches behavior instead of promises, because childhood taught him a brutal lesson. You can love someone's potential for years and still never meet that person in reality. Number 4, he may confuse peace with emotional emptiness. For someone who grew up around constant tension, peace can feel strangely unfamiliar. When arguments, criticism, unpredictable moods, or emotional pressure become normal, the nervous system can become accustomed to being on alert. Then one day, everything is quiet, and instead of feeling relaxed, he feels almost nothing. That is where the confusion begins. He may mistake emotional numbness for maturity. He may call detachment peace because nothing bothers him anymore. He doesn't argue, doesn't complain, doesn't expect much, and rarely gets visibly excited. From the outside, he looks incredibly composed, but calm and numb are not the same thing. Real peace still leaves room for joy, affection, excitement, disappointment, and vulnerability. Emotional emptiness removes the whole package. This can create a strange adult pattern. He may genuinely want meaningful relationships, yet when someone gets emotionally close, he suddenly feels uncomfortable. Not because the person has done anything wrong, but because emotional closeness requires him to feel things he has spent years learning to control. So he retreats. Then the distance feels familiar again, and familiar can be dangerously easy to mistake for healthy. The hardest part is that nobody may notice. He isn't creating chaos. He isn't demanding attention. He's functioning perfectly well. He simply became so good at surviving emotional storms that he eventually forgot peace was supposed to feel alive, not merely quiet. Number 5. He learned that explaining himself was usually a losing game. Some boys learn that explaining themselves doesn't actually solve anything. It only creates another opportunity to be misunderstood, criticized, interrupted, or blamed. So eventually they stop trying. A child who repeatedly says, "That's not what I meant," and still gets punished may eventually decide that silence is safer than clarification. A child who tells the truth and watches adults twist it may learn something even more powerful. Being understood isn't guaranteed, even when you're being honest. That lesson can follow him into adulthood. Someone asks why he made a decision, and he gives a short answer. Someone accuses him of something, and instead of defending himself for 20 minutes, he simply walks away. People may interpret this as arrogance, coldness, or a lack of communication skills. But sometimes he has simply exhausted himself trying to convince people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. The irony is that this can make him look incredibly mysterious. Everyone wants an explanation, while he has already decided that explanations are overrated. But there is a darker side. He may stop explaining himself even when someone genuinely wants to understand him. His defense mechanism doesn't always know the difference between a hostile interrogation and sincere curiosity. So the wall stays up. Not because he has nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way he learned that speaking more didn't necessarily make people listen better. Number 6. His obsession with competence may have nothing to do with ego. Some men become obsessed with being capable for a reason that has little to do with showing off. Somewhere in childhood, they may have learned what helplessness feels like, and they decided they never wanted to experience it again. So they learn, they fix things, they research everything. They become unusually resourceful. If they don't know something, they figure it out. Depending on someone else can feel uncomfortable, while solving the problem themselves feels strangely satisfying. From the outside, this can look like confidence bordering on arrogance. He always wants to know how something works. He hates being unprepared. He may even become irritated when someone tells him, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Why? Because competence gives him something childhood may not have given him: control. Being capable means fewer situations can catch him completely helpless. He doesn't have to wait for someone to rescue him. He doesn't have to trust that another person will do the right thing. He can simply handle it himself. But there is a trap hiding inside that strength. When competence becomes part of his identity, needing help can feel like failure. He may struggle to admit that he doesn't know, can't cope, or simply needs someone beside him. And that's the irony. The very ability that made him strong can become the thing preventing him from receiving support. He isn't always trying to prove, "I'm better than you." Sometimes he's desperately proving to himself, "I'll never be powerless again." Number 7. He doesn't always want to be alone. He wants to be unmanaged. There is a huge difference between wanting solitude and wanting freedom from constant interference. A man shaped by difficult childhood experiences may not actually hate people. What he hates is feeling watched, controlled, questioned, or emotionally cornered. If childhood involved excessive criticism, unpredictable rules, intrusive adults, or having little say over his own choices, independence can become deeply personal. As he grows older, he may protect his freedom almost aggressively. Tell him what to do, and he may resist. Tell him what he should feel, and he may shut down. Keep checking on him, and he may disappear. From the outside, this can look unnecessarily stubborn. Someone might think, why can't he just let people help him? Because to him, help and control may have become dangerously close in his mind. He doesn't necessarily want to live in isolation. He wants relationships where he can breathe. He wants people who can care about him without managing him, advise him without commanding him, and love him without treating him like a project that needs constant supervision. That distinction is easy to miss. He may happily spend hours with someone who respects his autonomy, yet become incredibly distant from someone who constantly demands explanations. His solitude isn't always a rejection of people. Sometimes it's a rejection of being handled. And after spending childhood feeling like someone else was always holding the steering wheel, having control over his own life can feel less like independence and more like finally owning himself. Number 8. He may reject help, even when he desperately needs it. For some men, accepting help isn't as simple as saying, "Thank you." It can feel like handing someone access to a part of themselves they have spent years protecting. If childhood taught him that depending on people often ended in disappointment, criticism, broken promises, or control, self-reliance becomes more than a useful habit. It becomes a rule. Handle it yourself. So even when he's exhausted, he'll say he's fine. Even when the problem is clearly too much, he'll insist he can manage. Someone offers support, and instead of relief, he may feel uncomfortable. A strange question can appear in his mind. What will they expect from me later? That question doesn't necessarily come from paranoia. It can come from experience. When help once came with strings attached, accepting kindness can feel like creating a debt. He would rather struggle privately than owe someone an emotional favor he may not be able to repay. This creates one of the strangest contradictions in extreme independence. He may desperately want someone trustworthy in his corner, while simultaneously making it incredibly difficult for anyone to stand there. And when people eventually stop offering, he may tell himself, "See, I knew it." The painful part is that the pattern can reinforce itself. He refuses help because he doesn't trust people. People assume he doesn't need help and stop offering. He becomes even more self-reliant. So the man who looks like he needs nobody may actually be someone who never learned that needing somebody could be safe. Number 9. He may have an unusually low tolerance for being controlled. For some men, being controlled doesn't feel like a minor annoyance. It hits something much deeper. A simple instruction can feel insulting when it carries the message, "You don't get to decide for yourself." If childhood involved constant monitoring, harsh rules, manipulation, or adults who ignored his boundaries, he may grow up fiercely protective of his autonomy. He wants to choose his own clothes, friends, career, routines, beliefs, and even when he wants to talk. That doesn't automatically make him rebellious. It can make him extremely sensitive to pressure. Someone repeatedly asking, "Where are you?" may irritate him more than expected. A partner demanding immediate answers may make him withdraw. A boss who micromanages every tiny decision can drain him faster than the actual workload. And here's the strange part. He may accept advice perfectly well when he feels free to reject it. The problem isn't always what someone is asking him to do. It's whether he feels he still has a choice. This is why control can trigger such a strong reaction. To him, independence isn't merely a personality preference. It may represent something he had very little of when he was younger. But there is a catch. If this reaction becomes automatic, he can start resisting perfectly reasonable requests simply because they feel like control. Eventually, protecting his freedom can become another form of imprisonment. He fought so hard to own his choices that he may forget not every request is an attempt to take them away. Number 10. He may become extremely difficult to impress. Some men don't react strongly to praise because compliments never became a reliable source of emotional security when they were young. If approval was inconsistent, conditional, or frequently followed by criticism, being praised may not feel as powerful as people expect. Someone says, "You're amazing," and he simply says, "Thanks." He doesn't reject the compliment. It just doesn't move him very far. He may have learned early that approval can disappear tomorrow. One day he is being praised, the next he is being criticized. So instead of building his identity around what other people think, he starts judging himself by a different standard. Did I do what I believe was right? That can make him surprisingly resistant to flattery. Money doesn't automatically impress him. Status doesn't automatically impress him. Popularity doesn't automatically impress him. Even admiration can leave him strangely unmoved if he doesn't respect the person giving it. But there is another side to this. Sometimes his inability to receive praise isn't confidence at all. He may secretly distrust positive attention because he expects a hidden motive behind it. Compliments can feel suspicious when genuine encouragement wasn't something he experienced consistently, so he develops an unusual filter. Don't tell him he's exceptional. Show him that you're sincere. Don't shower him with praise. Be consistent. Because deep down, he may have learned that words are cheap, approval is temporary, and behavior is the only evidence worth trusting. Number 11. He may leave emotionally before he leaves physically. Some people don't leave relationships when they walk out the door. They leave much earlier, quietly and almost invisibly. A difficult childhood can teach a person that closeness is temporary. People change, promises break, affection disappears. So instead of waiting for the final disappointment, he may slowly detach the moment he senses something is going wrong. He stops arguing, stops explaining, stops expecting. And that is what makes his eventual departure look so sudden. Someone may say, "Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" But in his mind, he may have been communicating for months through silence, reduced effort, shorter conversations, and emotional distance. He simply stopped believing that another conversation would change anything. This can become a powerful form of self-protection. If he emotionally leaves first, rejection cannot catch him completely off guard. But there is a serious flaw in the strategy. He may sometimes abandon relationships that could have been repaired because his mind has already decided that the ending is inevitable. Once that internal door closes, getting him to reopen it can be extremely difficult. And the people around him may never understand what happened. They remember the final conversation. He remembers the 100 small moments that came before it. That's why his departure can look cold when it may actually be the final stage of a long internal grieving process. He didn't suddenly stop caring. He may have simply reached the point where caring no longer convinced him to stay. Number 12. The biggest trauma may be that he became so functional. Nobody realized anything happened. Not every wounded child grows into an obviously troubled adult. Sometimes the opposite happens. He becomes incredibly functional. He performs well. He solves problems. He rarely asks for help. He keeps his emotions under control. He shows up when expected and handles responsibilities without making much noise. And because he isn't causing problems, nobody looks for them. This can create one of the strangest forms of hidden pain, being praised for the very behaviors that helped him survive. People call him mature when he learned to suppress his needs. They call him independent when he learned not to depend on anyone. They call him strong when he became uncomfortable showing weakness. Eventually, even he may believe the story. He doesn't think something happened to him because his life looks perfectly organized from the outside. That's what makes this kind of childhood experience so difficult to recognize. There may be no dramatic breakdown, no obvious rebellion, no public crisis. There is simply a man who became exceptionally good at functioning. But functioning isn't the same as healing. He can build a career and still struggle with trust. He can solve everyone's problems and still have no idea how to ask for comfort. He can look completely composed while carrying emotional habits that began decades earlier. Nobody saw the struggle because he became too good at hiding the evidence. And perhaps that's the cruelest irony of all. The child who learned not to be a burden may grow into the adult nobody thinks to check on. The childhood behind a highly independent man isn't always visible in the man standing before you. Sometimes the quietness came from learning that speaking up changed nothing. The independence came from discovering that relying on people could be disappointing. The emotional distance came from protecting a private world that once felt safer than being exposed. The obsession with competence came from refusing to ever feel powerless again. And that's why we should be careful with labels. Not every quiet man is a Sigma. Not every independent man has childhood trauma. And not every difficult childhood produces a deeply independent adult. People are far more complicated than internet personality categories make them seem. But when these patterns do exist, they tell a much deeper story. The man who seems impossible to reach may have once been a child desperately trying to figure out which version of himself was safest to show. The man who never asks for help may have learned that needing people came with a price. The man who walks away without looking back may have already spent months grieving the relationship in silence. And the man who appears completely fine may simply have become exceptionally good at functioning while carrying things nobody noticed. So perhaps the real question isn't, why is he so cold, distant, or independent? Perhaps it's, what did he have to learn too early? Because sometimes what looks like personality is actually history. And sometimes the strongest walls weren't built because someone hated people. They were built because, at one point, those walls were necessary. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of the hidden psychology behind these behaviors, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more thought-provoking content. And if one of these points made you see someone, or even yourself, in a completely different way, leave your thoughts in the comments. Because understanding someone's behavior becomes much easier when we stop judging the walls and start asking what built them.